labels are really dangerous. To say I'm autistic, so I can't, or I have Down syndrome, so I can't, right? That's not really true.
Welcome to the Insurance Refocused podcast, where we're highlighting real agent stories and how they are innovating to respond to the changes and challenges happening in the independent insurance industry. My name's Lindsay, and I can't wait to introduce you to my amazing co-host, who just so happens to be my mom, Carey Wallace. Mom, how you doing today?
Linz, I'm having a good day. I am back from vacation, a week in, got a couple new staff and people on my team. I'm feeling pretty good, but then I look at my to-do list and I think, oh my Lord, that's the thing. How's your day going today?
It's going good. I had to put all of my random Post-it note to-do lists all together on one today because I was running out of space and also looked like a crazy Post-it lady. So I'm feeling ya on the to-do list today. But I'm super pumped. We've got a really, really cool guest joining us today. In fact, multiple people have reached out and said we should have him on after I already snagged him and said, hey, you need to jump on our calendar. I'm going to start with reading you one of his recent posts. That is how I found him on LinkedIn. And then I would love to jump in. Super pumped for this conversation. So I'm going to read this post. 3 months ago, I went through the incredibly difficult and emotionally exposing process of getting diagnosed with autism. It has been one of the best things that I've done for myself for personal progression. Why would I be so open about sharing this on LinkedIn? Aren't I worried about how that would negatively impact people's perceptions of me? The world needs to know that hiring people with level 1 high-functioning autism could be the best decision you can make. Spencer, love that you posted this. I'm not going to read the rest of your post. It was long. It was amazing. But super pumped to have you join the show today and share a bit about your story and what we can learn from your story. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so Spencer, maybe you haven't stalked us as much as we've stalked you. So let's just go with that, okay? And
Cool.
I don't know if you know why we are so interested in your story, because it connects so deeply with our story. What you may or may not know about me is I have two daughters, Lindsay, obviously, and her sister Morgan. And her sister Morgan is a year older. She was diagnosed with high functioning autism. Actually, her diagnosis was PDD-NOS. So at the time, that's called pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. Her diagnosis was at age 2.5, and she has lived with high functioning autism her entire life. She's one of the coolest people I know, to be quite honest with you, and she's probably taught me more than I've ever dreamt of teaching her, and her sister, and her father, and her grandparents, and her whatever. Like, the list goes on and on. But she sees the world differently. There's no two ways around that. She approaches the world differently. And I do want to put a huge asterisk here. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So it is not something that looks and feels the same in everyone. But I loved that you were outward about, hey, listen, this is part of who I am, and I'm sharing it as because it's a good thing, rather than something that you want to keep closed. Because my daughter, being diagnosed very young, I think she wanted to be, I'm going to say really offensive word, but normal, and not talk about that. And I think that's what we all think, like that's a problem. So I'm going to pause there and say I'd love to hear your story, which is different than Morgan's, obviously, and what led you to getting diagnosed, sharing it with the world, all of those things.
Yeah, happy to share. And I would agree that there's not really a certain, all autistic people are very different from one another. The only commonality is that our internal worlds are just very complex, is the best way to explain it. But other than that, it differs so greatly, right? But my story, yeah, I mean, the reason why I looked into a diagnosis is there's been certain situations that have come up in my life that have just been super confusing and hard to navigate. And as I've gotten older and as I've had kids, the sensory issues have been getting more and more difficult. I found myself getting more and more impatient with them because of loud noises, especially the more tired I would get at nighttime. And then as I've been part of a startup, there's been certain things being involved in the startup with it just being really stressful and moving pieces and lack of structure that have been really hard to navigate. And so just the accumulation of all of these things, as well as thinking about my past experiences and social difficulties that I had, that's kind of what incentivized me to look more into it. And I would say the thing that did hold me back for a while is probably my own misunderstandings of what being autistic means, right? I always imagined or understood autism as people that do the hand flapping and yell out in stores or that are just super socially awkward. And I never really saw myself as that. And so he was even misunderstanding on my side. And as I went through the process, there was a lot of education that happened with it. And it's been, like I said in that post, it's been one of the best things for me. And it helps me understand the struggles that I face every day and how to cope with those and excel.
So when did you go through the process of being diagnosed? I don't know when that happened. Is that super recent?
Super recent. Yeah, it was in May. So it's only been about 3 months
Yeah.
since I got the official diagnosis. So it's been a whirlwind the last 3 months, to say the least.
Good for you. Good for you.
So was there a specific moment that you remember that you felt like, okay, it's the right time to go get diagnosed? Or was it something that just built and built over time that you were like, okay, it's finally time?
It's a combination of building, but there was a specific event that I was like, okay, it's time. I had a lunch scheduled with some friends, and they're Brazilian, and so they're not very good at time. Time is really important to me,
Mm-hmm.
and we got to the restaurant 5 minutes before the time that we had agreed, and then these friends showed up 30 minutes late, and they brought their two twin girls that were both 5 years old, and they're both super super loud and pretty whiny. And I remember sitting at the table with them and just having this internal conversation with myself, outward facing, being stoic, looking grumpy, right? Not talking to anybody, but just having this very fluid, thorough conversation in my head about the situation. And while I was talking to myself in my head, I was like, I think I am autistic, aren't I? Looking at the situation.
Ah,
So
that's funny.
I reached out to a friend that I had actually hired about a year before, and he has some kids that are autistic. And I reached out to him. I was like, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking. Based on your interactions with me, what do you think?" And he's like, "Oh, since day one of working for you, I knew that you were." I was like, "Oh, okay.
You're
I
like,
guess
okay,
it's time
then.
then
Yeah.
if it's that apparent." So,
Yeah.
yeah.
What are some of the major challenges that you have faced and overcame? And how have you, like reflecting back now, knowing that you are autistic and you have the diagnosis, that you look at a little bit differently?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind the most is I said it in a post once, but there's a misconception that being autistic means that you're socially incapable, and that's not true. I would say that what is true is that social interactions are more calculated. And as I've navigated my career, that's something that's been fairly difficult to navigate, is being aware of the importance of social interactions. Like I've excelled in my career so quickly because of another autistic trait of hyperfixation, right? I've just taken a hold of the career and just gone for it. But I've at times left behind the social stuff, and that's frustrated people. Coworkers have gotten offended or, um, yeah, put off, I guess is the right way to put it, by my aggressive approach towards my career or just certain interactions. I used to, I I made an internship program at the prior company I was at, and one certain year, the group of interns were particularly, I guess, the right word would be sheltered. And so, like, I learned pretty quickly about how I needed to change how I talked to them and how I guided the program because there was a disconnect in my head of the social part of it, right? And so there's been a lot of those situations of just the social aspect that I've had to correct and navigate and change and reform in my mind how to approach certain situations. That's been a challenge.
If you're an agency owner and you're thinking about selling your agency or thinking about growing by acquisition, you need to know what Cake is all about. Cake is an online marketplace designed to help buyers and sellers strategically find each other. One of the worst things you can do if you're selling one of your most valuable assets is to only talk to one buyer. Cake allows you to anonymously list a book of business or a slice or your entire agency for sale. Vet those opportunities and make sure that you've created demand for your agency and therefore the highest possible price. If you're looking to grow by acquisition, it's hard to find opportunities. Cake simplifies that process for you. I highly recommend to many of my clients that are thinking about dipping their toe into buying or selling an agency to check out Cake. Yeah, you've said a million things that I swear you and I could probably talk for hours about this topic, just so you know. Like I'm sitting here thinking about a couple of things you said. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to run through a couple of them. So you said one of the reasons you didn't get diagnosed in the beginning was your own misperception. And so obviously my daughter, Lindsay's sister, was diagnosed very, very young. And she had the standard thing like you described, where she would flap her hands, repeat things. She had some of the stereotypical behaviors that as a new mom, you're thinking, what in the world is this? Like, I have no idea what I'm looking at, right? But for many, that does not exist. Like, it's not. So I love that. What's really funny is she has those, but she also doesn't view herself as disabled as others. So I think it's important to say anyone, and for any reason, can have misconceptions about what a disability is. Even the people that have the disability can end up having misperceptions about it. Like, that's human nature. We all go from what we think it is rather than what we are. It's just kind of interesting, isn't it? Yeah. And so that was the first thing that hit me. But the second thing that you said was social interactions. And I guess as I'm listening to you talk about the hyper focus and social interactions and the different characteristics that come from any disability, my attitude is I'm listening to you and I'm like, the hyper focus is actually an ability, not a disability. That is positioned you to become really successful. And I wish the world looked at someone who thinks differently and they focused on the ability that it creates, not necessarily a disability that is what's norm. So, that to me is one of the coolest things that we've learned over time, that she's got unique abilities that we just don't have. Like, that's just the way that it is, right? And so connecting this to the industry, somebody saw that in you. Like you're successful, you have jobs, you're at Rycor now. Like, talk to us about the unique people that saw your abilities, not, hey, this guy's a little standoffish if things don't go his way, or he's this, or he's whatever. Like, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I feel like you've described it enough that that's how it's perceived by others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To answer your question, I started in the industry as an account manager at a typical regional insurance agency. And because of the hyperfixation and my high attention to detail and strategy and analytics, I excelled at it very, very quickly. Um, but the problem that I had is I quickly became one of the best account managers in the agency really fast. And there wasn't really, I realized fairly quickly that as an account manager, there wasn't really anywhere else to go. And to answer your question about someone that gave me opportunity, is I had heard the CEO, Terry Buckner, was interested in doing an internship program. And that was something that I had done before, creating an internship program. And I went to him and I was like, hey, let me do this. Let me create this for you. I'm really good at it. I'll create it from scratch. You don't have to give me anything. I'll figure it out by myself. Just let me take a shot. And he was like, okay. And that was a pretty career defining moment, I would say, of having that chance to create something from scratch, which is also an autistic ability of mine, is being able to get an idea and then create it from scratch. Look at all the different details, all of the potential variables, put it down on a piece of paper, make a plan. It's something that I really excel at. And that was a really cool opportunity that let me take that chance. And it led me to making a producer development program from them as well. And just being able to build these programs and getting my hand dirty and creating stuff. But that was a pretty big defining moment. And then when I came over to Rycor, it was actually a cold reach out on LinkedIn from Wade Millward. He had been coming up with this idea for a couple of years. They had just barely started production, but it was him doing it all by himself. And he was like, hey, I've been watching your story. I want you to come over as my first employee and just kind of take over running the agency for me. I was like, all right, let's go. Well, first I said no. And then after him talk to me a couple of times, he convinced me to reconsider and took a shot at it. So
Why'd you say
I'd
no?
probably say those are the two people.
Yeah, why'd you say no?
Um, I'm fairly risk averse, is the best way to put it. At the time, I was looking at leaving Buckner, the regional agency, and I'd been looking at insurance companies, being like an underwriter or an agency rep, and I had gotten a couple of offers, but it wasn't scratching the creative itch side, the creation side. And so I said no at first because it seemed too risky for my appetite. Um, and I perceived that he would want me to move about an hour south of me. Um, but then he told me about the business model. He told me I was going to work from home. So I was like, all right, let's take a shot. I'm young. Now's the time to do something a little bit more risky. All right.
So one of your posts, when you were talking about that, you reminded me of one of your posts that was talking about uh, you used to work in a super large company and people would kind of laugh and say, here comes Spencer with all of his notes and all of his plans and everything written out. And when you transferred to a smaller company, that was seen as a strength and was seen as something that was like, oh my gosh, Spencer is so organized. He has a plan. He's going to follow it. Are there other traits about yourself that you have seen valued in a different light um, in that small org versus large org relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. I've already talked about hyperfixation.
Hmm.
Um, One of the best parts about hyperfixation is you're able to be super efficient and you just plow through work so fast and so efficiently. Um, and especially with starting an agency, that was critical because there was nobody else that was coming to save me, no one else that was coming to help me get a sale, to bring in revenue. I was all by myself, right? And so being able to have that hyper fixation of this is what I'm doing right now, and I'm just going to go for it and give everything I have was critical. It was still valued at the other agency, I would say. That's why I was such a good account manager, or why I was so good at creating programs, was because of that hyperfixation. But I'd say it's even more so at a smaller company because they they rely on that hyper efficiency. I would say it also comes with its struggles. Multitasking is super hard for me. Um, if I don't have to-do lists, I will forget things, right? My wife, I make her send me a list of things to get from the grocery store, even if it's like 2 items, because once I get to the store, I won't remember what those items were. There's pros and cons to it, but there's definitely some big pros.
Yeah. It's
Sure.
so funny. In my household, we've been having that conversation a lot of uh, when you go from a big org to a smaller org, resources aren't available. My fiance has always worked his whole career in like a large org. They're an implementation consultancy. So he's had, a number two to say, hey, can you import this data for me? Or hey, can you fix these bugs? Can you do this? And he's transferring into a startup. Like he's going to be employee number three. And one of the things, as he was deciding, like, should I do this or should I not? Like, is this even a good idea? Um, I jokingly told him, like, honestly, I think you can do it, but I also think it's going to be entertaining because you're going to realize, like, holy crap, like, there's no one for me to like turn to my right or left and say, here, can you do this? Like, you're turning to yourself and you're saying, add it to the pile, buddy. Like, it's going to pile up. But he has that hyperfixation, like, loves to hunt down work, get it done. So that's why I know that he can do it and will excel. But I think that is something that a lot of people struggle with, going from large to small.
Yeah, it's definitely not for everybody.
Mhm.
And if I knew what it involved, I don't know if I would have done it.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking
um,
I know a little bit about that myself. So yeah,
yeah,
it's a big
ex-
jump. It's a huge jump.
it is, especially someone that loves structure. I love structure and consistency, and I kind of had to create that for myself at the beginning, which was super hard.
Mhm.
Um, but you grow a lot from it,
You do.
right?
Yeah.
So
I once had someone tell me, I don't exactly remember how the conversation started, but basically they were saying, look, I can create a structure for you, but realistically, the structure that I create is not going to be good enough for you. So can you just create this and like tell me what it is so I can follow it? Like, you are going I can create it, but you're going to annihilate it. Like, I can give you a starting framework, but realistically you're the one who needs to do this. And I was like, oh yeah, I probably do thrive in a small org. Like, that was like my like small org defining moment of, yeah, you're right. You're correct.
yeah, my problem is I create too much structure, and so when I bring in people, they have a hard time following all of the different steps
Yeah.
because I overcomplicate it. But
So
yeah,
Spencer, tell me, full disclosure, I've actually talked to Wes a fair amount about how many people with disabilities are underemployed because of this disability versus ability and the perception problem, their own perception, other people's perception, whatever it is, there is a challenge in our country
Mm,
for people who of all abilities being underemployed. And while I watched what Wes is doing with Agency VA to solve something like poverty, my challenge was, can we solve that by placing people that have abilities in roles where they would thrive and setting them up for
mm.
success? So it's something we're still toying with. It might be my next career. Who the heck knows? Like, that is not a spoiler alert for anything, but it is a passion of
Yeah.
mine. There's no two ways around that. I guess my question to you is, you're living it. You're very high functioning. You're super successful. I love seeing this. But what advice would you give to those that may not have the right perception on how to become more inclusive and leverage some of these incredible abilities for people that might not fit the mold exactly of what you think they should be? Tell me what advice you would give.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with on an individual level, what people have to have in terms of a mindset change, in my opinion. Um, I'm partially really grateful to be late stage diagnosed, later in life diagnosed, because I don't know if I would have accomplished as much as I have if I would have known earlier. And the reason is because I just kind of had to figure things out, not knowing what was going on and just figure it out. But even then, it's labels are really dangerous to say I'm autistic, so I can't, or I have Down syndrome, so I can't, right? That's not really true. You have struggles, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. I think of when I first started at Rycor, within the first 2 weeks, I had to go to this conference. Terrifying for someone like me to be like, hey, go network with hundreds of people and create a name for us, create a reputation for the company. And I was like, I just started for you guys 2 weeks ago and I don't know anybody. But I went to the conference, talked to a few people, had their like awards dinner, and then I went back up to my hotel room and I knew I needed to like still network and talk with people, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I just had a complete shutdown. And I remember pacing back and forth in my hotel room, just pacing. Stimming is another way to put it, but just pacing, like talking myself up. And I was like, okay, let's go. And I opened up the hotel room, went downstairs, and I just found the first person, started talking to them, and all of the anxiety kind of just went away, right? And it ended up being a super successful event. But if I would have listened to my innate reaction, right, of, oh, I'm done, I'm going to stay in my hotel room, I'm not going to socialize, I would have lost out on a lot of opportunities. And so that would be my challenge with people with just any disability, is I would challenge your mindset of what you're capable of. I think you're a lot more capable than you think. And there's certain situations you just kind of have to push yourself through and figure it out, even if it's hard or even if it's against um, what's natural. You just push yourself through and you learn a lot from it.
Yeah. But what about from an employer standpoint? So if there's someone, because that's who's listening to this. The people that listen to our podcast are agency owners, because we typically talk about M&A, transitioning ownership, technology that can make you more efficient. So those are the typical listeners that we have. And I hope to God they are thinking to themselves right now, like, holy crap, how can we find somebody with hyper focus, like, innate abilities? Like, whoa, I want to find myself a Spencer Berg, and I want to hire him and have him lead my team. Like, hello, for sure. So, what would you say to them? Because not everybody presents in a way that that this innate ability is there. Like, that's the thing, right? So, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, and I would say both with autism, also with like something like ADHD, there are certain things that they have in terms of superpowers that are just pretty common for those disabilities, right? And so it's learning how to recognize those traits. With autism, it's the hyperfixation, it's detail orientation, it's facility to identify data and understand data, right? Data is a lot easier for people with autism to understand because people are confusing, but data, it is what it is, right? And so typically data is super easy for them to be good at, right? And so putting them in that type of role, they're going to just crush it for them. Compared to someone with ADHD, as an example, that typically aren't very good with organization or with time, but they're super, super personable, or they're super extroverted and super creative, right? So it's putting someone like that in a role that you need someone that's really creative and really empathetic and passionate, that maybe organization isn't as important, right? So it's just learning how to put the right people in the right spot.
Yeah, you made me think of a picture. So, as an agency owner or as someone who is putting together a team, first you got to recognize all the abilities of the people in front of you, and then you have to make the measurements match their gifts. Not necessarily everybody's measured the same way. And the picture that I'm thinking of is there's a goldfish, a tiger, a bear, and I can't remember, but they all say, okay, I want you to climb that tree. Well, good luck, because they all have abilities, but they're not going to be able to climb that tree the same way, right? But they can all get somewhere. No two ways around that. So, yeah, this has been amazing. I love that you shared your story, and I hope that other people that have superpowers, as you put it, find their way to understand it in themselves and be able to leverage that. So we are all focusing on abilities rather than disabilities. It's been super interesting hearing your story, and you can bet I'll be following you on LinkedIn now and listening to all your posts for sure. So, Spencer, if somebody wants to reach out to you and talk more, either get advice from you, maybe just connect with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's just Spencer/Berg after the linkedin.com/Spencer/Berg. Happy to talk to anybody. It's something that I'm pretty passionate about, of just giving to people what I didn't have, or helping people realize their potential. It's something that I'm super passionate about. And so I'm happy to talk to whoever. So.
Thanks so much for coming on, Spencer. I hope that you, first of all, I appreciate your openness, honesty, willingness to share, that you come by naturally from your posts, and maybe not even come by naturally, but you're willing to lean into the discomfort if it doesn't come naturally. And I hope you continue. Thank you for sharing your story with us, though.
Absolutely. Happy to share.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Insurance Refocused podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to hit subscribe and leave us a review so you'll never miss us. Want to learn more about how Agency Focus can help you grow your agency? Head to agency-focus.com or email Carey directly at carey@agency-focus.com. If you need to get in touch with me, feel free to shoot me an email at lindsay@agency-focus.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.